So let me just introduce the panelists that we have in the room here. And I'll start in the order in which I'll ask them the questions. And I'll start with Tilson Mangoni. Tilson is a managing director of Vision Wave and is a chairperson of the Tshwane University of Technologies. Of technology, not technology. And he's also a head of policy for the Black Business Council and a member of the board for Ntlatlapa, right? Ntlatlapa, South Africa Scenarios 2030. I won't go into details in terms of his CV, and I can invite you to go and check. We have everybody on our website. The second person that I'll call, I'll check. Looks like my notes are running away from me. The second person that I'll ask the question when I do ask the questions will be Abdul, who's next to me. And Abdul is a highly recognized and qualified information technology practitioner. And he's currently the Chief Technology and Information Officer for Infrastructure South Africa, which within the presidency, as well as a non-executive director for Computer Aid International South Africa. So Abdul was recently selected as one of the global 100 leaders by a UK publication. So we have him. Then the next person that I'll call upon to answer the questions will be Rachel Mangaba. Rachel is a senior manager data architect and has 15 years experience in data analytics in the private and public sectors. So she currently works at the South African Local Government Association in that particular portfolio that I've just highlighted. Last on the panel that is sitting here, we have Shabari Shailigeba, who's an international development professional with qualifications in architecture, environmental design, sustainable energy planning, and public policy. And she works now at the British High Commission in the FCDO office. And last, I have Dr. Lee, who's joining us remotely. I think you can all see him now. Dr. Lee has been a professor at the Liverpool John Moores University in the UK since 2014. And he's also an adjunct professor at Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. One of the areas that we have actually highlighted closer to what we are doing here is that he was a chair of the focus group on data processing and management to support IoT and smart cities and communities at the ITO, in the Standardization Bureau of the ITO. So his work produced a number of guidelines around how to use ICT, particularly IoT, in the smart city area. So now you know who are here, and you can see that they are all qualified to answer the questions that have been laid out. Let me start with you, Tilson, because I just said I will start with you. From the business perspective, when we look at these commons and we want to balance the commons, and what is actually what is the open data, particularly at the common level, what are the positive spins that you can have? Maybe just another question, are there any negatives for, from the business perspective?
Thank you very much, Program Director. I was hoping that I'm going to get mic'd, since I'm in a C4IRSA event. So I get this mics. So Dr. Ntlatlapa, I think next time we must try and get proper mics so that we sound technically and we become technically savvy. Yeah, nobody uses these things anymore. But anyway, firstly, let me qualify. I sit here from the Black Business Council that as a hero policy. So my posture will, from a policy perspective, first, I think generally the concept of open data within local municipality and local government, we fully support that. And I'll tell you why. I want to start with the one part that I think we tend to ignore, especially within South African context. We have a serious public sector business trust deficit in this country. Business doesn't trust public sector and vice versa. More so when you go to the local government sphere of our governance structure, which is where service delivery takes place, which is where real business opportunities takes place. You know, people always speak about the high end of government, national, provincial, but where there's real commercial value in terms of opportunities, it's really at the local level, at municipal level. You can look at across different countries. And one of the things I always say that from a business perspective, that is important from a data set, that if you're to make data available to the public citizens in the main, you have the potential to unleash so much creativity, so much opportunity. I want to take an example, for example, that Dr. Pari mentioned, the taxi industry. I mean, it's a classical case of an industry that is literally well entrenched within local government, which has got potential for growth from an innovation perspective. The data set of that industry, if it were to be made to be open and available to a lot of people, I think we can unleash a lot of what I call self-data rich businesses. And I think that's an area that's got massive potential in this country, you know, in terms of how we make the data that is sit within government available to the public, more so to young entrepreneurs. You know, if you go to any township, I tell people in township, there's no shortage of ideas, but there's a shortage of data that is rich, that people could use that data to say how, if I another example, you take something as simple as waste collection in townships. If people knew that information was readily available, I mean, a lot of ideas that could be created, whether you're talking a app, a concept, whether you're talking about implementation of IoT and so forth. So I think what I'm saying that there's a lot of potential business spin-offs that could come from making open data available. Of course, you asked me the negative. The biggest issue is going to be the issue of IP. You know what I mean? If I have access to the data and I create a productivity solution, for example, who owns that IP? And I think South Africa, we have to do more around the issue of IP. South Africa is a very serious conversation. I think we need to reflect more how we come up with what I call flexible policies around that, because that's one thing that I think make it difficult for people to get access to data and create solutions, because we're worried about IP. Secondly, the issue of privacy. We still need to protect the privacy information. How much data do you make it available to the public, and how much do I want the municipality to put all my records, you know, into the cloud or in the public space? So I think that's how we need to balance in terms of what is private and what is good for the public good in terms of making sure that people have access. I think we can dissect the data in terms of what we think can benefit society in terms of opportunities, but we have to be very careful that in doing so, we also don't create unintended consequences or unintended scenarios where certain information is compromised. Okay, I'm going to pause you. Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks. Maybe I'll change the order a little bit and then bring Rachel here. From the local sphere of government, maybe if we were to respond to a similar question in terms of those, those positives that we can draw and coming from that particular local sphere of government, and maybe the negatives as well.
Okay, it's on. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I guess mine would be to start with the fact that the whole open data concept is very fascinating, or it's a fascinating concept to me, because it relates to one of our core fundamental constitutional rights to access to information. And saying that, there have been, there are a number of strides that at a macro level are enabling open data and sharing of information. And one particular one would be the fact that South Africa, as one of the signatories for open data, basically it emphasizes that or calls for championing of open data. And at the same time, you've got the policies around the National ICT Policy White Paper, which also looks at the fact that as much as there is, it looks at ICT, but there's also a framework of how to roll out open data. You've got the Data and National Cloud Policy, which also, as much as it's currently a draft, but it also looks at looks at open data and how that can actually be moved forward to create a data strategy for the country. So that being said, the idea is to actually make sure that there is enough data that addresses societal problems, societal issues. So access to data platforms, common data platforms, access to data in its raw format is quite key, because at the end of the day, we're trying to encourage collaboration. We're trying to bring across a data-driven culture at a local level. So municipalities or the local government sector requires to actually even have plans for municipalities, for their citizens, I mean. And at the end of the day, those strategies should be informed by data. And if the data is not open enough, it becomes very difficult to plan. The case of the taxi industry, the case of poverty and health, and we saw with COVID that there was access to information. So enhancing data-driven decisions is quite key at a local government level. There's also the area of enabling planning and monitoring. When there's enough information, then we're able to plan for our citizens. But more than anything, there's the area of innovation, which drives entrepreneurships as well. He spoke about, my fellow panelists spoke about it, that at the end of the day, you've got young people that have ideas, but you can create innovation, and who can create innovation by addressing a number of problem statements in the sector. So the whole idea of open data is not only a concept that should be addressing only be addressed at a national level, but the benefits should be felt by the citizens, and it can only be through proper planning, using information that is easily available, easily accessible, easily managed. And then there's an area of open standards as well that needs to be addressed when it comes to open data. What standards are we using? What platforms are we using? Are they common? And do we have catalogs of the data that we're using, which expresses the actual information about the data itself? So in a nutshell, the concept of open data at local government is quite key. But the keynote speaker, Dr. Padi was talking about an issue around literacy. There's an element on the people's level where we need to also be educating our officials on how to use data in order to make those data-driven decisions. I actually liked the quotation H.G. Wells around data-driven, so I'll research that a little bit further. So the literacy element as well is quite key at a people's level, but collaboration between private sector and public sector is quite key, and that's the only way we'll be able to actually fully understand how to enable a number of use cases to address the various problem statements at a local government. We spoke about the issue of addressing in KZN the floods, and how do we use satellite imagery data to address or predict eventualities, and how do we also put together databases that not only look at conflict of interest around municipal officials. So there's a number of use cases that can be enabled, but it all depends on the availability and accessibility, as well as the quality of the data that is out there. So at the positive sides actually outweigh the negatives in this instance.
All right, thanks for that. Maybe I'll bring you here, Abdul, but maybe in the same manner, the same similar question, but maybe specifically to just look at the societal challenges that open data will be able to address. Sure. So specifically on that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Director. I think just wanted to just actually get to a stage of understanding what open data means, and I think that's a start of really looking at the impact of what it can do. So open data obviously is completely accessible. It's, you have different formats readable. That's to be quite clear. Readable. Cost. Access data at no cost. And also from a right perspective. So if you look at it from that perspective, the opportunity that open data has, and I can give a few examples of this. So the one example would be with Ntsigwene, and I'm just going to give a clear example. We have information that's available currently through SAPS, and those are just information about crimes and what has happened. What they've done there, they've taken that information, they've used it usefully to determine which is the crime hotspots, and they actually acted on that, and they ensured, the government actually created, then what do we need to do to prevent the promenade, the area to be more safe, and so forth. So that's one example of just taking data and ensuring that it's creating an effect. Going forward, from a beneficial perspective, and I agree with the panelist, there are more benefits from a value creation perspective, from a new offerings perspective, as well as an accountability. Now, another project that I just want to just talk about is a project that we're working with CSR at the moment, where we're actually taking data and we're trying to predict the next disaster, right? We're taking data from examples from geoscience, we're taking data from weather alert, we're mapping into a system so it can give us more alerts. So we can actually prevent and understand what exactly is going to happen and where, what the trends are. And this type of process will really protect human life, will prevent risk, it'll prevent disaster, and that's just using a process that we as infrastructure, South Africa wants to do. We want to map our infrastructure so we know exactly where our infrastructure is. And I think just having open data available, it creates, McKinsey actually created a report and did a survey. The economic value reaches up to $3 trillion for enhanced open data. They've done the survey, and it really creates that opportunity to actually make a difference going forward. Another area that I just want to address, and it's more about creating an open data program approach, and where society, especially NGOs, are using that as a process to enhance and to move forward to achieve the objectives. And that's where we see at the moment NGOs trying to achieve their objective by using data that's available and actually trying to look at societal problems and trying to sort it out and trying to make a difference going forward. So I think from that perspective, I don't want to go into the risks, but if you look at there's individual risks and also there's organizational risks. Now, if you look at the individual risks, you look at privacy, security of data, and so forth. But if you turn it around from an organization perspective, there's liability, there's IP. How do we put processes in place in order to protect that? Do we remove certain policies? Do we create additional policies, or do we remove specific data? So that's a challenge, and I think that's what we probably need to work going forward.
All right. No, thanks. So maybe I will then turn to our international speakers, and I'll start with you there, Dr. Lee. Just in terms of the countries that you have worked with, you have worked in the UK, and you're also also working with in Korea. How different countries engaging with open data, particularly around regulating it, promoting, and maybe also just removing, removing all the myths around what you have with data and so on. Can you just give us those examples?
Okay, so first of all, I'm very happy to be here as a panelist. So I would like to emphasize the necessity of international standardization, because you raised some issues regarding multiple countries, how we will collaborate, how we will coordinate this kind of issues. So in this regard, basically, in order to facilitate the sharing of data, we should consider data interoperability issues. So in order to facilitate this kind of interoperability concerns, we need to develop related standard. So I believe this one is a very much important element. In this regard, lots of standardization bodies are currently working on the development of related standard and recommendations. So I would like to just simply emphasize various kind of important technical topics. For example, in the keynote speech, there was some important keyword regarding commons. So in the data perspectives, we need to think about how to use data. So in this regard, rather than just considering open data, we need to invite lots of different stakeholders to support sharing of data. So in this regard, very important technical challenge is to develop a platform to support PCI. PCI stands for participation, collaboration, and incentives. It means that rather than just considering only supporting various kind of different users, how we maximize the value of this kind of collaboration. So that's the collaborating point. And then how we provide incentives to users. So this is also tightly related to the ownership issues of data. So in this regard, some part might be very, very important things from technical perspectives. However, some part are also very important from the governance and certain particular regulatory issues. For example, in EU, we have a strict rule, GDPR. So that kind of point, there are lots of concerning issues regarding privacy matters, etc. But we also wanted to stimulate the use of our data with so many different stakeholders. So there are some controversial points, but if we will set up certain particular rules, then we can facilitate this kind of sharing environment. So these kind of regulatory concerns need to be done some case by technology. That's the regulatory concerns by technology. So it means that currently there are lots of useful tools, such as blockchain and smart contract, NFTs, etc. There are lots of useful certain particular materials and tokens and some particular environment. So then how we put this kind of things to support some strong interaction between physical space here and then cyberspace even. So in the virtually, we need to support lots of transactions remotely. But in case of a virtual environment like internet in the cyberspace, we do not have any particular barriers like some physical different countries. So that's the reason why we need to set up very important standardization work and then fully compile these kind of things. I would like to emphasize this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll bring you on the similar type of question, Shabari. And I think Dr. Liz talked a lot more from the standardization perspective, and maybe from your side, with the countries that you have worked with, how have they dealt with that?
Thank you, Program Director, for that question. So I just want to say that, and just to contextualize my response, I lead on our urban development portfolio in South Africa, so I want to use examples from South Africa because we have quite an extensive portfolio of working with municipalities, building their data capabilities and seeing that very much at the center of inclusive economic growth and what that means for service delivery. And then I'll connect it back to some of the international examples as well, where things have worked or haven't worked and why they didn't work. So first of all, I think when we talk about open data, especially in the context of local government, it's very easy to get trapped into this idea of that all we need to do is open up public information to anybody to access, and that's it. That's all that we need to do to solve the problem. The thing is, data is not the problem. It's about how it's accessed and how it's interpreted, especially when local governments use that data to make very important decisions that directly influence people's lives, as Rachel also mentioned. So in our work, we work with the City of Cape Town, eThekwini, Johannesburg, and soon we will be working with a number of intermediate cities as well. We've used, there was a term that Rachel actually used called use cases, which is essentially picking up specific problems that we see at a local government level and identifying different ways in which data can solve those issues, but not data as numbers or information, but what does that mean for the institutions that are pretty much at the heart of it and the communities that are ultimately the face of that information. So in the City of Cape Town, they had quite an ambitious data strategy. And the challenge was, how do we actually operationalize it? How do we turn that into a functioning, actionable plan? And so on the back of that, for the last 3.5, 4 years, we've been trying to build all of these toolkits at the same time as we're building their data capability and analytical capability to address some of the very fundamental challenges, like how do people in informal settlements actually report electricity fault? How do we actually connect with people living in not just in informal settlements, but all across the city, in different parts of the city, in different economic zones of the city, to actually connect with the municipality when they need specific service delivery issues to be addressed. In 2020, when we were just at the start of some of these projects that we were working on, we realized that we had to pivot our approach, or rather, readjust the way we start seeing the opportunities that data has to offer in the way we work with municipalities and the communities. And so we used some of that information that we had access to for informal settlements and tried to map the different health services that existed across the city that the city could then eventually use to provide necessary vaccine services and other kinds of provisions like water and sanitation. So that shows that while it's the same data at the heart of it, you can actually have multiple applications all at the same time. Now, a very important part of doing this and being successful at it is understanding the institutions that you're working with, what culture they have, and also whether they are themselves able to work with each other's data between different departments and have that interoperability. So it's not just a question of building digital platforms or having the most up-to-date tech in place. It's a question of how do we change institutions and organizations to work with data. And so it's as much of a question of transformation within government as it is about tech and data and apps and all of these other fancy things that come into the space of 4IR. And just to finally kind of conclude that point with a very interesting example, in Mexico, when they started with their open data strategy, they established what they called an open data squad. So it's a very cool name for a group of very talented individuals in the government who are highly technical, have an incredible amount of expertise, people perhaps like Rachel who have that extensive amount of experience working with data analytics from private sector, and some of them also worked in public sector. That project essentially over time completely diluted and was disbanded simply because those people who were very much at the heart of it and were seen as champions left the organization for a host of different reasons. So we need to understand if you're actually building capacity within local government that's also sustained, and how does it actually remain in the institutional memory and not something that is pinned to an individual or to a specific talent in these organizations. So open data policy, open data architecture, all of that is very important, but we need to understand that there are people behind these numbers, and when we talk to them, when the issue of literacy comes in, it has to be more than just understanding what the statistics is actually telling us.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask Dr. Lehotla to answer one question, but I just want to highlight that I'm not quite sure how much time I'll be allowed in this session. We may not have enough. So on the sheets that are sitting on your seat there, you will have a small paper that is attached there. On the right-hand side, there's that QR code there. If you just click on that, you can be able to send us any of the questions, and I can commit to making sure I'll chase them down to answer those questions, and we'll send them back, and then we'll put them also on the website, those questions. There's a number of questions that we can submit, but we can also take a survey that we have there on that end. So now coming to you, Dr. Lehotla, you have set the stage, and you have shown us the barriers that may not necessarily be technology barriers. And we have had the fellow panelists here talking about many of the areas, including the fact that the private sector and the government sector, the public sector, don't necessarily work together on these issues and all the innovations that had come through. I just want to check from your side, given that you didn't have legislation or policy side as a barrier, do we actually have the blockage from the legislation perspective for us to have open data benefits that we have talked about here? And maybe if not, what's missing?
No, thank you very much. What a difficult question. From the Statistics Law, Statistics Act 1999, Act 6, we are bound as a statistics office to make that data open, save for making sure that there is privacy observed. I think what might not be done is that it's not very visible, although I think we have made it visible on the web. I think there are constraints around translators of data. What does it mean? And how do we use it? In 1996, I think for the census of 1996, we scored our own goal. That goal came from the Treasury because they said we needed 6 million to make a push for the data. So they said we should be creative, and by being creative, we started selling the data. And that caused a serious barrier, and I think created a brand that was despiteful of Stats SA for selling the data. So the use of data of the census was not liberated. It was not liberated to be used, although the elections really used it extensively for demarcation of electoral wards and so on. So that happened. But at the level of industry and universities and so on, that barrier of sale caused a problem and created it. So I don't think from the act itself there is a barrier, but its visibility, access, and the skills of handling that, and therefore the intermediaries that should use, generate the possibilities of utilization of data. Let me say one last thing, that the technology, yes, but when you are out there in Lesotho and the clouds are forming like this and your husband is on the mines and you have to decide when to plow or to plant, that call on a technology like a cell phone is instantaneous and the decision is made. It's no longer writing a letter that will take 2 weeks. to the mine, and the husband says, yes, you can plant. In the meantime, the rain is gone and it's dry. I think those are the things that technology must solve. Those rudimentary things must be solved. And there are many of them.
Thank you. That's one part. I think you have highlighted from the legislation perspective, you have highlighted the legislation that enables that particular institution. Can I just check with the rest of the panels? Would that particular legislation that enables Statistics SA, in fact, that stops Statistics SA from not releasing the data openly, is that applicable to all others? Is it applicable to SALGA, for instance? Is it applicable maybe from the national government? Just any taker on that, maybe specifically Rachel from the local government, but others can also come in.
Okay, thank you. This mic business is quite interesting. So we are advocating for access to as much data as possible because for us to be able, or for the local government sector to be able to make decisions that impact the lives of you and me, they need to be informed. But at the same time, the level of literacy is also quite important because, as my fellow panelist has mentioned, that critical decisions are made, and if those critical decisions are not data driven, then we are basically skewed. We'll build a soccer stadium while we actually need a library, for example. Or we'll close potholes, meanwhile we have a water leakage. So maybe those are not the exact or the cleverest examples, but the idea is there'll be a misalignment. So as much data as possible is what the sector requires. So we would need Stats SA or the Act to actually allow for data to be accessible, allow for data to be released. However, if there's an element of privacy that needs to be part of that data set, that is quite fine. But for data to inform decisions, it needs to be available so that you encourage innovation, you encourage entrepreneurship, and also collaboration as well.
Mike. Yeah, I think I wanted to just highlight 3 points that were raised by my colleagues from this side, my panelists and other one. Obviously, I'm speaking from a business perspective. I think for me, it's not about making data available. It's about the purpose of making data available. You know, we talk about the crime stats. We all get that information, but what is the end goal? What are we trying to achieve? Now, open data achieve 2 things that are very important. I think one thing that I think South Africans, we're good at, but I think we're doing enough to drive that. And hopefully, if we open data more, we do what we call active citizenship. You know, the reason why I want to get my information about my crime state in my area because it makes me have more interest in terms of the day-to-day of my neighborhood. And I think that's one key benefit for me from a societal perspective, that you start to drive active citizenship participation. The second part, I think, it speaks to what else we're trying to achieve from a business perspective in terms of the data set, you know. And I think it's an opportunity that we don't speak about and we're not doing enough. How do we get business people and service providers and equip them with the skills to dissect and analyze data? You know, because this is where I think there's a real opportunity from an innovative perspective. So while I agree with you that data is not necessarily about technology, but the truth is data have some really potential spin-off from a technology perspective, especially if we can start to look in terms of how can we use data to develop skill sets that allow people to dissect and start to see opportunities within a data set. Hence, I speak about what you call self-rich businesses data sets. So I think for me, those are the two key things that I think we shouldn't lose in this debate.
If I may just add on that, I think there's other three areas that I just want to look just chat about in terms of where open data can also, it's decision making in terms of how quick open data can provide real-time decision making. I think that's also very important. We talked about growth and companies to grow. How do we use open data for new offerings, and how do we allow customers to create new products, services? As we know, we want to get SMEs, developed in South Africa, grow the economy. So that's the one. And the last one I just wanted to add is probably accountability. Is how do we use accountability to impact change? And I think that's going to be the most important. If we can utilize open data in that respective, and also focus on the citizen level and exactly what they need. And the simple would be connectivity, understanding which areas are good for yourself and connectivity, Those are just basic things that you need data in order to ensure that you can connect. And that's just, something that's very basic that we need to enable. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. I think we will be wrapping up soon. I can see some people are not looking at me with the happy eyes. I just want to bring you here, Dr. Lee, in terms of your advice in this particular case. You have heard the local speakers here and highlight where there's a legislation that specifically enables the open data, and there are cases where there may not necessarily have been a specific one enabling it in other spheres. In terms of your advice, drawing from the know-how from the ITU as well as other countries, what would you advise us as a next step from here? We have unearthed all of this, and we know the opportunities are there, and we have the challenges, including the challenges about the know-how, the skill in the people, in the interpretation and the use of data. What would be your advice of our next step so that we can gain those benefits?
Yeah, okay. So regarding next steps, I would emphasize data economy. So far, we just concentrate on very traditional business areas. But if we consider open data, then there are lots of opportunities, particularly data business aspect. So in this regard, I would like to consider two important points. First one is how we valutize data. Even open data, we need to well classify various kind of different types of data. And in some case, we need to valutize this kind of data. So, to well facilitate some particular transactions. That's the very important things to support lots of business areas. We know very well in some cases these are quite public areas, but there are also lots of opportunities for global business. So in this regard, certain private data, that kind of data will be valutized, and then some cases we can share this kind of data. We also stimulate the related transactions and some businesses. So that kind of manners, we really need how we support certain values from raw data. Secondly, to support this kind of business areas, certain data-centric approaches for global economy, I believe trust is really, really important point. So without trust, it's really difficult to support relevant some facilities or infrastructures. Basically, all participating stakeholders need to know we all are quite reliable and trustable. whenever we collect data, we believe data, and then some case we can also analyze and then get certain particular prediction results. Based on this kind of a result, we can also take actions. But that kind of all procedural methods, from creation data to user of data, we need to build up a very secure, reliable, and transparent platforms in order to support trust solutions. So that's the very important, challenging work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just like maybe each panelist just in a minute in terms of sum up. I know it's a difficult one to do in a minute. Just to sum up, and then as you sum up, it's very important to consider that as we are talking here, as I said in the beginning, as the C4IR, we always advocate not having just a dialogue, but to create a community that will then enable, the use of these 4IR technologies, and at the core of it is to be able to have to access that particular data, which could be used by other technologies and so on. So as you do that, what I would like you to also just highlight is how you see your area participating in that. Would you be, up for being involved, and how? And maybe how others could be involved in your view. I'll start from this side, going that side.
Okay, thank you, Program Director. I think the most important thing is leadership and culture. I think that's something that we need to ensure that we can drive the open management programs, and I think if we ensure that we create that via either a committee and work together, as actually the private and the public sector partnership is critical in this. We will allow for more adoption, and I think we'll allow for more impact in terms of open data and the benefits. I do think as well awareness of this is obviously another factor. So if we can ensure that we provide more awareness around this. So I do see that a lot of open programs that will be driven around this so that we can get more awareness. From our perspective, we would need to look at how we can provide data to support our infrastructure. So we would need to know, where our infrastructure is, how it's mapped, and obviously from a connectivity perspective, where is the problems. There will be obviously security and data that will be kept on our side that's to keep private, but where there's data that needs to be available to the citizen, that's what we'll need to allow. But obviously, I do see that we need to spend a lot of more time on the policies, and obviously we do have the POPI Act in South Africa. We do have the GDPR, which is quite important. I think that is going to be adopting that act and ensuring we enforce the policy together with leadership and culture, and really driving the benefits of what open data can really do. And I think if we do that and work in collaboration, and be able to focus on what it can do and what the benefits are, I'm sure then we'll be able to make a difference. So we'll focus on the infrastructure, but we'll have to work together to achieve the real benefit of open data going forward.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. Well, obviously, I come from an advocacy role. From a policies perspective, we are involved. As an advocacy role, our task is basically to influence policy formulation and policy implementation in the main, within the different structures. It's a conversation. I think we truly believe that it ought to be amplified, because I think all of us, we agree that there's a lot of potential around open data. The challenge we have in South Africa, like anything I tell people, is not so much about the will and the desire to make these things happen. It's really our capacity to deliver some of these things. A lot of it, one is an infrastructure issue that I think we got to be pragmatic and realistic. That there are some major infrastructure issues that we have in our country to make these things quite easy. Two, is the implementation capability and capacity to implement some of these things. So I think we continue to drive advocacy work in terms of driving a capable state and making sure that we encourage a much more robust delivery mechanism within the state. And yeah, we'll continue to do so. Thank you.
Okay, on our side, so the SALGA through the digital unit, which is where I'm located, has 4 key priority areas. 2 of them which are maybe applicable to this conversation, driving digital maturity and also providing data as a service is one of the priorities. And the other ones relate to products, and the last one is about broadband. So our aim is basically to drive data and digital maturity in the sector. And we have enabled a number of use cases or data solutions that we would like to actually partner with CSIR on. There's one, for example, on sentiment analytics, where we are listening digitally to what the citizens are saying about their municipality. And we are also developing a number of around conflict of interest, and there's a number of others that look at just municipal financial management data products. So the aim there is to actually drive data literacy. I don't like the term literacy, I prefer fluency, even though the definitions are slightly different. But this is a program that we're running around data fluency, where with all these data solutions that we are driving or we are bringing to local government, how mature are we, or how fluent are we in understanding what the insights really mean? So having as much access to data is quite important, because it informs even how we predict the future and how we predict certain areas at a municipal level. Say if the status quo continues like this, this is where your municipality will end. This is how local government will look like. If we shock the system and we introduce these initiatives that you have in place as a as a municipality, this is where you'll be. So informing predictive analytics is also quite key in making, by having as much data as possible. So ours is more on collaborating around, rolling out and piloting these use cases, and also making sure that the sector is fluent enough to make those data-driven decisions. So I'll end there.
So there's a lot that we have to do, but just for the purposes of my 1 minute, number one, we are going to leverage our relationship with the national government. So we have a very good partnership with ISA, Presidency, and National Treasury, as well as Department of Corporate Governance, and really using that relationship to strengthen the policy environment that's needed for data-driven decision-making. And combined with that, we have quite a large ambition to create more provincial-level data strategies and mechanisms for communities, private sector, and the government, local government, to actually access data through a standardized networked platform. So as part of that, we'll be working on a KwaZulu-Natal data strategy with eThekwini very much at the heart of it, and hopefully that can also bring in that vertical and horizontal integration that we're looking for in the South African sort of government ecosystem as far as data is concerned. So those are the big things that we'll be focusing on. Thanks.
I see. In 1996, 98, we ran something called census at schools, and it had to be sustained by the CSA program. One girl there, after we measured, they measured their food, they measured their height. The one thing that impressed me a lot was when this young girl said, before census at schools, I didn't know how tall I was. So knowledge about yourself is very crucial. So whatever program we undertake, I'm not suggesting that it should start by knowing yourself, but leaving that part in the data systems will not be organic and sustainable if it leaves the part that knowing yourself through data. That, for me, is what we should keep top of our minds. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Likenu, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, actually, as a representative of ITUT for global standardization, I have focused on various kind of technical topics in the context of smart cities and communities. So, first of all, I would consider quite an important point regarding the necessity of big playgrounds to support open data environments. So this kind of playground will be achieved by certain particular technical solutions. So that this technical solution should be trustworthy and decentralized data ecosystems with artificial intelligence. So that's my conclusion. So very traditionally, we focused on IoT. So all things are sources of data, and then collect this kind of large big data, and then we now can use so many available tools for artificial intelligence. All these kind of solutions should be well integrated. Then these kind of solutions also need to be supported by trustworthy technologies. And then most of the important thing is let's try to provide a kind of important incentives to contributors as users. So that's the decentralization aspect. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. I've had a lot of inputs on this and a lot of keywords that have come through. One that has seemingly come through across was the collaboration, both within the public sector and with the private sector. That has come through quite a lot. The capacity, whether we talk about data fluency or capacity building or whichever type of word that we use, but to capacitate the citizens in the use of that particular data, even from the awareness perspective, I think that's one of those that has come through. Of course, the issue of the infrastructure is also very important because, as we are saying, we are able today to have Dr. Lee participating with us because there's an infrastructure that enables that. Otherwise, someone who may want to participate but is sitting where they can't get that, they will not be able to use that data. So there's networks that we have, and I think going into the public-private partnerships came through quite a lot. So there are many areas, and of course the one that have just come through, maybe it's not a new thing, or maybe before I go to that, the knowledge, and I think Dr. Lekota talked about the knowledge about yourself, and I interpret that as just making sure that the local government, whichever local government, have a knowledge about what is happening in the area and is able to collect that and able to store that and process that. So that's an important thing that's highlighting there. But I think the last thing that seems to have come through here, it's sort of, there was a terminology around the playground across those. And this did link to some extent to what Rachel was just highlighting in terms of the collaboration on doing things. So from what I can hear, the people that are on the panel, and I suppose maybe others that may not be on the panel, have a similar understanding of having something like what we could call, a data sandbox, where you may not necessarily, or you may know that there's no legal blockage, but maybe there is no proper guideline. So you need to ring-fence that and be able to just do it. And I think this is what I'm hearing, and this is what I would like to take forward. But there's also a highlight that there might actually be a policy issue that still needs to be brought in there. So in a sense, you could have both the operational data sandbox as well as a policy sandboxing. So I take those two as the key things. And I do have your, I have your contacts. I will be coming back around that. But I hope the members here who have attended have also left their details so that we can also call upon them to participate in this. But I think we are all, in a sense, in an agreement that we need to do something. And in this particular case, what has been there is that let's just experiment with it. Let's get this, awareness and capacity raising programs on the go. All right. With that, I would like to thank everybody who participated, who's here. We hope to hear from you a lot, and I'll just apologize for not giving you an opportunity to raise your voice here. But as I've committed, we will note all the questions and we will be able to respond to them in due course. And finally, our panelists here, thank you for giving us your time. Dr. Lee, we have some presents that we're going to give to the panelists. We haven't sorted out the virtual present giving yet. So in this particular case, I will only give the presents to the physical ones. With that, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. So thank you.